So how do we do this, right, Quentin? It's great. We're painting this blue sky moment, this utopia where infrastructure people don't have to worry about help desk calls and nobody's swapping backup tapes. And they get to be all that they want to be because that, maybe become a weed farmer, right? That there's a qualification in LA, right? And why I know this because my eldest actually wants to go study in LA for 6 weeks, where they teach you to become a horticulturist, but specific to growing wheat. And someone said that Bill Gates is buying farms. Why is he buying farms? Because Musk bought Bitcoin, and you're going to see farm shares going up, right? And then you can IoT the whole thing, right? And there's a cool story about that. But we're talking about changing the way you work inside of an organization, and it's a huge undertaking from a skills development perspective. The infrastructure guy that worried about IOPS now no longer has to worry about that. How do you go about doing this? Because naturally the app dev team is, hey, let's do this, man. My release management is great. I don't have a 4-day window because it takes 2 weeks to get through CAB. I can release proper. I can innovate for my customer, which is the business. How do we help infrastructure understand what this is? So take me through this. How do we go about doing this modernization? Like, what is the journey about?
So it all depends on where your journey is at, right? I mean, you might be in the cloud, you might be in Azure, you might have a few things spun up there. Often what you'll find is that that's done outside of your infrastructure and control, the teams that are usually managing change control and infrastructure. But it depends on where that journey is, right? So for, what we would usually do as Tangent is if you're right at the beginning of that journey, or even just trying to get to the point where it's more stable and repeatable, we look at what we call a cloud adoption framework, quick start and accelerate. And there you basically, or an app mod.
Good. Yes. I'm the sales guy, right? You don't have to pitch what we do around the cloud accelerator. Speaking of being a sales guy, right? Mandla has got another question around cost saving, right? How does someone who wants to transform their online presence onto Azure know beforehand how much money they will spend? Well, I'm glad you asked that. If you engage with Tangent, and we can do one of our quick starts around application modernization. Part of that program is right sizing with the right tooling. So Mandla, there are tools out there that can do an infrastructure assessment. So you'd either run the standard one from Microsoft called the MAP. We also we are certified in using products like Cloud Recon and Cloud Pilot and Cloud Atlas. Unified Cloud, not Cloud Atlas, that's a movie. And we actually use tooling inside the organization to extract data from what your current digital estate looks like on-prem. And then we right size that and give you the proper costing when it comes to what it should look like in the cloud. Now, naturally, you can go to the Azure calculator today and go, this is what I have, and that traditional lift and shift, let's move 27 VMs from here to there, because cloud is just a data center in another building, right? And what we do is we modernize what your usage is, right? And also understand this very clear. Like my kids, I've actually got, I don't have any here, but I've got these little motion sensors, right? That is in every bathroom in my house because my kids don't switch the lights off. They literally don't. And I don't know if it's a fear of cockroaches that might turn into like big alienation, whatever that movie was, The Arrival with Charlie Sheen, I think, or the guy from Californication. The thing is, right, when moving to Azure, you need to understand that, yes, there is cost savings, but the cost savings is changing the way you look at infrastructure. You're not buying a motherboard with a CPU, some sticks of RAM, and a disk, and some sort of a fiber channel controller. You're not doing that. It's not a 1U, a 2U, a 12U. It's not that, right? Although 12Us don't exist. I think the biggest server you have is a 5U. You're not doing that, right? You need to understand that you need to switch the lights off, understand the utilization. So if your CPU utilization on hardware is 27% on one piece of tin, right? Why would you need a 8-way CPU for that application if it's only running at 24%? So right sizing is super important. Understanding what you have, looking at the tooling that can help you modernize. I mean, we use Unified Cloud. There's a bunch of other tools out there that you can also use, but it's being able to right size what your environment's going to look like in the cloud. Is that my value add, Quentin? Do I hand it back to you?
Yeah, in short, what Al's saying is you need to assess.
Yes.
You need to assess. You need to do a digital estate assessment you can use something like the Microsoft, what is that thing called, the MAP toolkit. And you can use that to do your assessments, gather that data. That's also going to give you a good idea of what you have installed, because often guys don't know what's running, right? And that's what their local costs are. And then you plug that into something like Unified Cloud's Cloud Recon, and it gives you what it's going to cost you in Azure. And then it comes to, okay, now, how do we make sure that our tools like Cloud Recon will also give you recommendations in terms of consolidation of services, as well as moving some services to newer platforms or modernized platforms like Azure App Services or Kubernetes services. And that's how you save that money. It is about moving to that platform as a service. And actually in the assess, there's one thing I'd like to, so assess is my top one, my top one tip for success is assess. Do the right assessment.
It's a guiding principles on slide 35.
Yeah. So my top one, the first tip for success is assess. Do a digital estate assessment. Use something like the Map Toolkit or Cloud Recon. I don't want another Cloud Recon salesman, but a tool like that, and do a proper digital estate assessment with dependency assessments. You can also use Azure Migrate, fantastic tool to do that, to do the assessment portion. So as part of that, which is my second top tip, is you need to do a rationalization. So in the cloud adoption framework, they talk about the 5 R's of rationalization. And what you do is you take each item that you identify during your assessment. Let's say, for instance, you have a web application that is running on the SQL Server, a web application running on IIS developed in .NET on a SQL Server 2008 R2. Take that workload and rationalize it. Decide what you want to do with it. Do you want to rehost? Rehost is your first option because it's the simplest option. So then you're moving to, you can also move to infrastructure, platform as a service like app services. The second one is you can, re-architect. So that is looking at, how do you change the architecture a little bit. So that is often looking at consolidation, that kind of thing. What is the other R? Al?
Refactor.
Refactor. So refactoring is actually starting to look at things like containers and more modern practices like microservices. So that's when you start to think, okay, cool, we're in this journey, we're in the cloud, we've got scalability problems with certain portions of our service. Let's start to refactor them into microservices and deliver that. And then what's the last one? The last two.
I can't remember the last R, dude. You always ask.
It's
I might
replace.
remember
It's
3.
replace.
Replace. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the last R is replace. I can't remember what the other one is. But essentially the idea is my second tip would be to rationalize. Go through each work item, plan what you're going to do with it. If you've got a system running that you plan to replace within 2 years, don't think about refactoring, re-architecting, or rebuilding. That's the other one. Rather think about rehosting, because that's just simpler.
It's something to note as well. A lot of customers get stuck in the refactoring while they wait, right? So it takes 18 months to rebuild an application when you could still experience cost savings by moving to the cloud. And I think it's important to understand that you can modernize after the fact. You don't have to modernize in flight. So have a look at the right sizing and the cost effectiveness of something like Azure, and then make sure that you can actually literally use Azure Migrate and move your environment so that there's cost savings of the infrastructure that you're currently paying for, that you have paid for, that you're sweating for the next 10 years, and things like that. So don't have modernization stuck in your head where you don't migrate. I think it's important to understand that. Yes, you need to assess, migrate anyway, because you can prove that it's cheaper to run stuff in Azure properly, right? And then phase 1 is to get you in the cloud so that your cloud posture is better, and then you can modernize post migration. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, and I think actually often the 5 R's follow each other. You might rehost first, then re-architect a little bit, then do a bit of a refactoring, and then do a rebuild. You don't need to wait, like Al said. So just in terms of assessment, yeah, let's move on. So there's a few tools you can use for assessment. Yeah, we're talking about the migration of the Azure App Service, or the App Server, what is it called? The App Service Migration Assistant. And this is an application you can either download or run directly off the cloud. The link at the bottom here will take you to the cloud version. And what it will do is it actually interrogates the pages that are served up by your application and determines what they are. So the App Service Migration Toolkit is going to help you to migrate from an IIS or a LAMP stack to an app service scenario. But that's not the only tool you have. Cloud Pilot, Unified Cloud has Cloud Pilot, which is going to give you the same thing. And it's also going to give you recommendations.
Not only LAMP, but WAMP as well, please. Be inclusive here. It's not just Linux applications. It's also Windows applications, right? Thank you very much.
I don't know what the stack's names anymore. I mean, there's a few of them.
There's XAMPP, right? XAMPP, which is the X, LAMP and WAMP, yeah.
There's new ones. I mean, there's ones with Cassandra in it and Kafka and all of that.
So Tomcat and all the other bits.
Yeah. So yeah, we're specifically talking about Azure App Service Migration Assistant, but you can also look at Cloud Pilot, which is a unified cloud product, which is going to do something like, well, it's going to give you recommendations for containerizing your .NET applications, PHP, Java, and a few others. So the key is assess, right? Do your assessment, even do a digital estate assessment, understand what you have, and then we can begin to migrate, which is the next step in your journey. And here you have a decision to make. And this is, again, you're looking at what are my rationalization decisions I had, right? So you can either just lift and shift, which is that's just a rehost in our rationalization decision. And you can use the migration assistant to do that, to push it to app services. You can decide to redeploy, which basically means, okay, I'm going to deploy my code to this environment. There's other things you're going to be doing which are key. There's probably, I think, my fourth top tip is that you need to automate as much as you can during a redeploy. Automate as much as you can of this. Infrastructure as code is, and pipeline automation.
Yeah, but that's the other word I don't like, right? I don't like Kubernetes and Terraform. I've still got, HashiCorp stole one of our architects because he wrote the Terraform exam, right? It's like 2 days after he published it on LinkedIn, he came back to me and said, listen, I'm moving to Amsterdam. I said, why? No, HashiCorp offered me a job. I said, how did they find you? Oh, no, I said that I became a Terraform person. So terraforming, what do we call it? The landscapers of Azure, right? Infrastructure as code, I definitely see that as being the glue between developers and infrastructure people, right? Because you can PowerShell and bash and bin and whatever else, and everyone's excited because there's a Linux kernel inside of Windows, whatever that is, right? And I can work in a terminal window, right? I work in Total Commander, okay? That's where I live, right? so yeah, I've got a terminal window as well. But yes, that glue, that bridging the divide between developers, because in the old days it was build and run, right? Run people weren't developers; they were infrastructure people. Build people were developers, right? And now the lines are being marred. Is marred the right word, or grayed? It's becoming gray. It started with PowerShell, right, where you could run a PowerShell commandlet, and then you had to add code to that. So does that mean an infrastructure guy that can do stuff with PowerShell around GPOs, and now he wants it to enumerate and loop through and store it as a variable? That's code, right? So now deploying infrastructure as code means you need to understand how to do that. And for the bash people, it's great. Infrastructure people at my age, do we really want to do this, Quentin? Is there value for people my age about, hey, I'm not spinning up a VM, I'm telling this code on release with these touch points to go spin up the VM, right?
I don't know, Al, not your age, but I'm sure
not
everybody else.
Rhodesian age, right? It's a Rhodesian age, like a Rhodesian Ridgeback, right? I can tell you a story about Rhodesian Ridgebacks, right? But that's for another time. Anyway, carry on.
So bringing infrastructure as code it's something that I think enterprises should be looking at. Maybe the small to mediums, maybe not so much. Although it does simplify your life. Right? You just automate and things happen. It's actually magic. Bring in a partner like us, and we can help you with that.
Ding 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 ding. Every time Quentin says bring in a partner, it's like tangent bingo, right? But yes, we've got 18 minutes to go, and we've got 11 slides.
We've got like 11 slides left. All right, cool. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to shoot through the rest, but essentially there's three here. We're talking about lift and shift, which is rehost. redeploy, which is usually re-architect with a little bit of automation. And then if you have containers, containerization. So containerization make your applications a lot more cloud agnostic. Although, cloud agnostic, people think that Terraform is cloud agnostic. Yes, it does have multiple cloud providers, but you write code for each provider. Leon, who's part of our team, he could tell you all about that.
Yeah, syntax is different, right? The syntax is always different. It's like going from Oracle to Microsoft.
The definitions are different, right? I mean, Microsoft talks about a virtual network, and Amazon talks about a VPC. So that's the main differences. So again, with the migration, with the app service migration assistant, it will do your readiness checks. It'll check for certs, port bindings, dependencies, that kind of thing. And then it'll take you through a guided migration. At the moment, the guided migration only supports .NET and PHP. It doesn't support Node and Java as yet, but they are working on that. So this is what, so this is what a bring your code looks like, right? So this is not a lift and shift. You can bring in all of the development tools that you're used to, .NET, Visual Studio Code, all of the languages. You can build them out of your source repo using CI engines like Azure DevOps or Jenkins, and then you can deploy them using things like Azure DevOps, and of course your other deployment option, which is automation, infrastructure automation.
Quentin, I have a question.
Yeah, shoot.
As a non-developer, what is with the naming conventions for all of these things, man? They're all weird. It's a dialect.
That's what we do, weird, right?
Jenkins and Confluence and the tool chains is like Node and Angular and all these weird and wonderful names. That can they just not call it like what it is, right?
No.
Git. What is Git?
So can I ask you a question? Do doctors call diseases what they are?
Look, you can't even read the script that you get for an antibiotic. Exactly. Oh no, we're giving you Augmentin, and you look at the squiggle. It doesn't even read with an A.
We get to make up our own names. I mean, it's awesome.
Okay, our developers are taking over the world. Anyhow, moving along. Bring your own code.
So bring your own code. Essentially, the process is going to look like this. It might be a little bit technical for some people. But of course, you've got your developers that are sitting there pushing through Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or Eclipse, or, if you really want to punish yourself, Eclipse. And pushing it through some sort of...
Nothing wrong with Eclipse, okay? Don't be knocking Eclipse.
I'm not knocking Eclipse.
My days.
And so you can push it through your continuous integration and deployment. Again, automation fundamental. It's my fourth top tip: automate, automate, automate. And that's going to feed into your app insights, and you're probably going to use other platform as a service offerings, into your app service. And then you're going to use other platform as a service offerings like SendGrid and email. And of course, one of the fundamentals you have to think about in the future, or in a rebuild or into a refactor or re-architect, is starting to look at modern authorization. So Auth2 identity, OpenID, that kind of thing, OpenID Connect. So you want to move to the concept of, I don't manage usernames and passwords. Fundamental. Let something else manage that for you. Identity Server 4, Azure AD B2C, any of those things. So so then our process basically for the developers, he pushes that into our app service, and our customer can then access that through a browser or a phone, tablet, or a tablet, and we have fundamentally basic building blocks underneath that, such as SQL databases, Redis cache, and blob storage. And then we get to the really good innovate portion. And the innovate portion is where we start to look at bringing in data from things like Twitter and starting to put it into Azure functions. And we start to innovate just beyond what our application can do. And we start to feed sentiment analysis and that kind of thing into our...
Just don't tell Trump to use Twitter, hey?
No,
not sure when they're allowing him back. All right.
They won't.
What's the next slide, Quentin?
All right, so the next one is essentially bring your container. So App Services does have support for container. Essentially, you're going to push your container into a container registry. You're going to, from that, of course, you can have a look at debugging, actionable insights, DevSecOps on Azure Container Registry, that kind of thing, CI/CD. And then you get to when you're actually running your container in the cloud. Now, there you could use app services, you could use VMs, and then, of course, you can use Kubernetes for containers. So I don't want to swear in front of Al. He doesn't like Kubernetes.
But look at those words, IntelliJ and Maven, right? This is not the Marvel universe. Anyhow, moving along. Yes, bringing your container, you can ship your container into Azure.
Yeah.
So it's container agnostic, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So containers are cloud agnostic or platform agnostic. So they're looking at, there you can run on your container anywhere essentially. But it's hard to move from one cloud provider to another. Ask Zander.
And that kudu is not a kudu in the South African term, right? It's not an animal.
Kudu.
It looks like a Swiss Army knife, right?
It is actually
and they're calling it a kudu. How do you get that wrong? Like, can we localize?
You can ask your mates at Microsoft.
Kudu. It's a kudu. The kudu is going to do a lot of stuff, right? And what? I'm going to watch the kudu run down the veld over here, right? The grasslands. But yes, connecting your data. I like the fact that a lot of these things, and for me, just listening to what you're talking about, from a cloud native perspective, there's a lot of cloud native technology here. And in the old days, Rhodesia, everyone that hates Microsoft used to only look at it because they couldn't deploy Windows 7 or Windows Vista inside of the organization. And that has plagued Microsoft since the beginning of time. Just a note that Microsoft is the largest producer of open source tech in the world.
True that. So this actually comes to my third top tip. So I missed one. I went straight from well, I'll just finish chatting to his children.
No, my kids apparently the post office. This is what working from home is like, right? If you want to normalize how things work, he just came in and the door's closed. And actually, I've got a light, right? I'm going to put on air. It's going to go across the door to my office.
So this comes to my fourth one, which is essentially third top tip. So my third top tip is to do your data first. I know that sounds harder, but you have to do your data with your apps to get the proper experience. You can't have an environment where you have an on-premise data center running SQL and your app running in Azure, because the connectivity between those two needs to be really reliable and really fast. And you want to move your data closer to your application to improve your reliability and speed. So this is my third top tip, is data first. Rather do your data first.
Yeah, so just a question on databases. You could literally, from a modernization perspective, and a lot of times we have customers, we're speaking to a customer right now on a data platform modernization, and there's no reason to have a database run inside or have an instance running inside of an operating system inside of a virtual machine when moving to the cloud, right?
No. So there are some
days are gone.
Yeah, so those days are limited. Let's rather say that. I mean, there are some technologies you can't get around, like inter-database communication. There are ways to get around it, but that again goes to the refactoring portion of what you want to do. So initially, you might want to run a SQL VM, but SQL database as a service is very, very, very reliable. It is cheaper, much cheaper in terms of licensing. And of course, Azure also supports MySQL, which is a managed platform. So just remember, all three of these options you see on your screen are managed platforms, right? That means you do not worry about updates. You do not worry about operating systems. You do not worry about uptime. That is not your concern. You need to just worry about what data is in there and what the schema of that data is. And that's actually a fundamental principle that you need to start to think about when you're moving to the cloud, when you're migrating, is that you're going to move away from having to do the mundane management.
All right. Some innovation tips. We've got 9 minutes left, and there might be some questions at the end.
Cool.
Look, resolving issues, what functional services you actually get once you're in the cloud. Azure Monitor, it's a great remediation tool. and you can actually visualize and analyze your application performance. So I think it's a great thing. There's also a security center, which will give you some remediation around your security posture and your secure score on what you need to tweak should you move to the cloud. There's stuff like Azure Cognitive Services are not just around surface, not just around search, and you can surface data that way. With Azure Functions, I use an Azure function to take Dolbit and deploy it into a SharePoint online site, right? Because you couldn't just embed Dolbit anymore. You know that you can't just embed Dolbit anymore. You had to use an Azure function to do that. DevOps and GitHub, and something we haven't talked about is SRE. So how do you build a proper SRE economy inside of your organization? And using tools like DevOps will allow you to do that. Bot services, yeah, it's great. You can build a bot, ask some questions. And then lastly, something I really enjoy is Logic App. So it's your rules engine, right? And you can start now innovating on top of your traditional application by building some really cool rules, and the engine is right there. Moving
so just
along.
before you move on, last one, sorry.
Last
just before you move on, my number 5 top tip is Azure Monitor. So make your stuff instrumented. Ensure you use Azure Monitor to do and if you get those last two right, automate and instrument, then you are going to be on the road to a DevOps team. And that's what you want. You want to be able to react to issues within your code sooner than anybody else, sooner than your customers phoning you. All right, Al, sorry. So here's a whole bunch of resources. Is Alistair talking to himself?
Unmuted. It's a vape-friendly show, so every time I hit the mute button, I get to vape, and I don't sound like Darth Vader, right? So there are additional resources. There's a wealth of knowledge. Look at skills development at Microsoft Learn. There's a ton of certifications around what you need to do from a skills adoption plan in order to understand what application and web application modernization is. It's not just everyone thinks it's a web application. I don't like the distinction. But there's a ton of information. Also, have a look at the Azure Migration Program. We're an advanced specialization partner, so we can help you. You can also get Microsoft to help you grow from a fast track perspective. From an enterprise engineering offer, from a premier field support, an FTE. No, that's a full-time employee. I can't remember what that is. And then, yeah, I'm very excited for this slide, because if you weren't impressed, that is a gratuitous slide just to add some fanfare to today's show.